Is Carson Beck a legitimate preseason bet for the Heisman Trophy? Sitting at about plus 2,200 odds. That's about number 11, according to kind of a conglomeration if you look at this. But I'm looking at Vegas Insider. Georgia quarterback Carson Beck. Kind of the presumed starter at this point. It'd be shocking to me if he's not the starting quarterback for Georgia when they roll out this season for 2023 as they try to go for their third straight national championship. I think that that's what's going to happen. But is a Heisman conversation for Carson Beck legitimate? He, the backup quarterback last year, Stetson Bennett, a guy who was fourth in Heisman voting on numbers that were not necessarily, they were Heisman adjacent, right? Those numbers weren't along the lines of some of the Heisman Trophy winners last year. Now, granted, Stetson Bennett didn't win it, and I'm going to break down some of those numbers. What does Carson Beck really have to do as Georgia's quarterback to win the Heisman? Andy Staples of On3 thinks that he's a quote-unquote safe bet to win the Heisman for a couple of reasons. So let's get into this. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post talking about Carson Beck and him as a Heisman candidate. What does this really mean for him and the Georgia Bulldogs? Real quick, Double Dogs, Dogstruction, our books. Those links are down below for that. The preview magazine's free with Double Dogs. Not that. I heard someone say Double Dogstruction the other day, so I got a little bit confused when I said that. Look, Carson is in Double Dogs, and it's a game. He played in a game where Georgia won 55-0. Carson, right? We gave him his little feature in this book. He came into that game and he ripped a couple nice throws. One being for a touchdown. I believe he threw 2 touchdowns that day. One to Arik Gilbert and one to Dylan Bell. So Beck, he came in and showed on that day against Vanderbilt that he can do it. Now, let's get realistic. Let's look at some numbers. Let's look first at what Andy Staples had to say. I've had a defensive lineman number 1 on my ballot before, so I'm looking at everybody, but I don't know that all of the Heisman electorate is doing that. For the most part, it's a quarterback on a team who is competing for the national championship, and Carson Beck at plus 2,200 feels pretty safe. He's using that as his rationale, using that Joe Burrow was plus 20,000 odds to win the Heisman heading into that 2019 season. That it's happened before. But let's look at from a numbers standpoint. Let's start with just Georgia history, right? New coordinator, Mike Bobo. What did Aaron Murray do with that? In 2011, 403 pass attempts, and he ends up with 3,100 yards, obviously, 35 touchdowns. So we know what a quarterback has done under Bobo, a good quarterback. And then 386 in 2012 pass attempts, 36 touchdowns. He had 3,800 yards, right? We're talking about Aaron Murray. He's not a Heisman finalist back then, right? This is 2012. So 2012 would have been Johnny Manziel's Heisman year. 2011 would have been, RG3? Yeah. And 2013, obviously he got hurt before. In 11 games, he threw for 347 attempts. Stetson last year threw for 455 attempts on his way to 4,100 passing yards. That's in 15 games. So he didn't have that number heading into the Heisman ceremony, right? But after 15 games, he threw for 455. That's about 30 pass attempts a game, almost exactly if you do that math. Stetson had almost 30, or just over 30 pass attempts per game. So for Carson, you already know he's going to have to be throwing probably 30-ish times a game to just get considered for this thing. I didn't do the math on Aaron Murray, but you can see Stetson threw more times than Aaron Murray ever did, right? And Stetson obviously had the most prolific passing year from a Georgia quarterback. So just the Georgia history standpoint, Carson's going to have to throw for more pass attempts probably than Stetson Bennett. Stetson, he ended up with... his yards per attempt ended up being 9.1. So Carson's going to do better than that. For Aaron Murray, his best year, he had 10.1. So Carson, as far as a Georgia history, he's going to have to bet the best quarterback here in Georgia history, right? Where Stetson Bennett just did that. Stetson Bennett 310 for 455, 4,100 yards, 27 touchdowns. Now, I think Carson Beck's going to have more than 27 passing touchdowns, and that's going to help him out a lot. But let's look at what some of the past Heisman winners have done. Caleb Williams last year in what was considered a quote-unquote weak Heisman pool, right? It didn't feel necessarily that he had the Heisman season that other players did as far as the moments, and part of that maybe, he wasn't in the playoff and all that, but you get the gist. So in 2022, he had the 4,500 yards, but 500 attempts, right? And that's not in 15 games. That's in fewer than 15 games. I believe he played 14 games last year. So for Caleb Williams, I mean, that's a lot of pass attempts. The 42 touchdowns to 5 receptions matters a lot. So we saw, what are these crazy numbers? 500 pass attempts, 4,500 yards is lower than some of these other Heisman seasons. Can Carson Beck get 4,500 yards? He's going to have to pass probably more than Stetson Bennett did. Something I think that you'll see with this new scheme, I think Carson Beck's going to go downfield a little bit more than Stetson does. I don't think there are going to be as many rollout situations where it's just quick hitting stuff to get the ball out the way that they did with Stetson and the way that they used Kenny McIntosh a lot. I kind of think that's going to be transferred to something else. Now, watch out for the way they use Dominic Lovett. I want to break down some more numbers. The year before, another year where it felt, what is this Heisman Trophy race, right? It felt like it was Bryce Young and then everyone else. Well, Bryce has a better year than Caleb Williams had, right? But he throws 547 times. He throws 47 times more than Caleb Williams did. Now, I know he did play an additional game, but 47 more attempts is still a lot. 4,800 yards, 47-7 touchdown to interception ratio. Carson Beck, those are the numbers that we're talking about for if Carson Beck really wants to be considered for the Heisman, right? Stetson, what is part of the reason why Stetson was able to have only 27 touchdowns and 4,100 yards to get there? Well, he also had 10 rushing touchdowns. That added to it. I don't think Carson Beck's going to have 10 rushing touchdowns. So Carson Beck is probably looking at 500 pass attempts, right? Because Stetson 455. We just don't think that's going to be enough if you look at the last two Heisman Trophy winners, right? The 500 and the 547. So probably looking at about 500 pass attempts. We're looking at, he's going to get around 4,500 yards and he's going to have close to 40 touchdowns. Is that in Carson Beck's wheelhouse? I think it is. Is he going to get there? Probably not, right? I think Carson Beck's set up to have a really good year. But is he going to have that crazy Heisman year? We're going to find out. What do you think? Links are down below. Thanks for watching.